We have with us Mr. Neeraj Sahai, President, Dun & Bradstreet International. Mr. Neeraj Sahai has decades of leadership experience in the global financial services industry with a track record of substantially improving business performance. He has successfully driven growth and change throughout his career, most recently as President of Standard & Poor's Ratings, S&P, where he initiated the transformation of the business and improved margins by 25% in 1 year. Earlier, Mr. Sahai was associated with Citigroup as a business head of the securities and fund services. And under his able leadership, the company's revenues and margins grew manifold. He has also served as the CFO of Global Transaction Services, as well as Audit and Risk Review Head of Capital Markets and Banking in previous roles with Citigroup. He has also served on the boards of various international financial and ratings agencies. Mr. Sahai holds an MBA from Clarkson University in Potsdam, New York, where he was elected to Beta Gamma Sigma for scholastic excellence. He has an MA from the Delhi School of Economics and a BA from the University of Delhi. He also attended the Advanced Management Program at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Ladies and gentlemen, with a thunderous round of applause, please welcome Mr. Neeraj Sahai. Next, we have Mr. Rajiv Kumar, Chairman of Pahle India Foundation and former Vice President, NITI Aayog. Dr. Kumar is currently member, Global Leadership Council, GASP, New York. He has wide experience of having worked in academia, government, industry, as well as multilateral institutions. In the government, he was Economic Advisor with Department of Economic Affairs, DEA, Ministry of Finance, and Senior Consultant at the Bureau of Industrial Costs and Prices, BICP, and Ministry of Industry. He has also served in prestigious institutes like Asian Development Bank, CII, FICCI, and was a part of boards for State Bank of India and RBI. With a huge round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Rajiv Kumar. And joining us, the next powerful speaker is Mr. Rajneesh Kumar, Member, International Strategic Advisory Board, Dun & Bradstreet, and former Chairman, State Bank of India. Starting his career with SBI in Uttar Pradesh, he rose through ranks and was posted in Toronto and London with postings at the Corporate Accounts Group, Mid-Corporates, and the bank's investment banking arm, SBI Capital Markets Limited. He has first-hand experience of almost every department of the bank before he moved to the headquarters as a managing director in May 2015. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together to welcome Mr. Rajneesh Kumar. Can we have a huge round of applause for all of them? Well, to moderate this discussion, I now request Dr. Arun Singh, Global Chief Economist, Dun & Bradstreet, to please take the charge. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I think in the morning we all agreed and promised that we'll keep the energy level high. So I know it's post-lunch session. Let me try again. Good afternoon, everyone. No, that's good. Good energy level. Thank you. I think we are a part of Power Session, and I'm expecting really valuable and enriched insight from this one. Let's make maximum out of this one. Otherwise, then I have to go to some of those moderators which I met a couple of years back in the Sri Lanka. That moderator used to, every 10 minutes, he used to basically ask audience, can you stand up and then sit down, just to keep the energy level high. Don't worry, I'm not going to do anything. I'm a nice moderator. And in DNB, we meet many MSMEs, many companies, and we just talk about entrepreneurship, how things are going in India, how they basically perceive the entrepreneurship. They always say, every household you see that when the child born, and then father always say that, "Mera beta kuch alag se apni tarah se kuch karega." Basically saying that he will start his own business and all that. The spirit is there, I think. In fact, if I look at some of the data, 100 million economic entities, if I have to divide by, the 5% per household and then 140 crore population, every third household will have at least one business person. That's basically overall piece look like. And, now coming to the crisis, as Albert Einstein said that, in fact, in the midst of every crisis lies great opportunity. In fact, business leaders who believe in this, they can foresee beyond the crisis and they can deliver better and higher shareholder value by exploiting what's happening into the economic space. In fact, if I look at in India, that's very true. After COVID-19, one of the worst crises in century, the new business registration rate shot up by 12% currently, as against less than 8% in FY16. That's basically appetite we have for the new business in India. And in fact, starting a business ranking improved while the ease of doing business shut down by the World Bank, but we have improved significantly from 142 earlier to 63 in 2022. But there are issues, there are challenges. I think since morning we spoke multiple. One thing came out loud and clear that every third economic entities or MSME, they face access to the finance. In fact, looking at the MAT credit gap, somewhere is close to 70% in India, which means there are enough scope for all of us to work together to improve those data piece. And that's why basically, with that context, I'm moving to our eminent panelists today to take their advice, to get to know where we are as a company, what is future lies, and what needs to be done to improve our overall MSME condition and entrepreneurship spirit in India, so as at least we contribute that target amount, what we're talking about, 50% of MSMEs contributing to the overall GDP by, in next couple of years, which means in journey of 5 trillion economy. So with that, I would like to move to you, Neeraj. The first things that, last 1 year, we got 2 lakh businesses registered in India, and that's, we are experiencing the surge in the entrepreneurship. What global trends are we seeing in a global age startups and entrepreneurship? And do you think India is a unique position globally in this regard?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I hope everybody can hear me. There are leading indicators and there are lagging indicators. GDP growth is a lagging indicator. Leading indicators are other variables. And entrepreneurship, the startup of new companies, the number of patents issued is one of the leading indicators that tells you about the dynamism of an economy, about the potential growth of that economy, and the level of outlook that the population has on that economy. And I think India is doing very well in that regard, because if you look at the ranking in the Global Startup Ecosystem Index, it's moved from 23rd to 19. If one looks at the Startup India, the flagship program of the government, that shows the public sector's commitment to allowing entrepreneurship and new startups to grow in the country. If one looks at the technology services industry in India, it's at such a cutting edge that provides another fundamental foundation stone for the growth of high-tech and high-tech ventures in this country. The financial digital platform is arguably the best in the world. So I think if you look at all those leading indicators, India is doing exceedingly well. Now, obviously, that's the glass half full. If you look at the glass half empty, can India do better? Has India more potential? And I firmly believe, and I think a lot of people around the world believe, that India's potential even exceeds what we are seeing today. And I think that's a even for example, if you compare the number of new companies registered in the Nordics, which is about 2% it has 2% of India's population, there are about 1,300 new companies or businesses that start registered daily in the Nordics versus say about 564, a little less than 600 in India. So the potential for India to double, triple the size of what it's doing today in the new startup is substantially more. Even if you look at the flow of capital to this segment, the flow of capital in terms of debt and equity is much lower than it is in comparative markets, whether you compare it to China, whether you compare it to, of course, the US, but even if you compare it to other emerging markets or countries like Israel, we are like a third or so of the amount of capital that's flowing on a debt side or on the equity side into these companies. So I think while India has taken a lot of steps, those steps are, you can see the results of that, but I think there is a lot of further opportunity and headroom to grow.
So thank you, Neeraj, for providing such a wonderful global comparison. I think that shows that where we are and what is the gap look like. Now coming to you, Mr. Rajneesh, being a former banker of one of the biggest public sector banks. Now, we know that there is a graduation phase from micro to small, from small to medium, and from a medium to large. And we know that data coming up, there's a good number of companies coming up. But unfortunately, when I look at data, when I went to DNB data, and I looked at the 20% of the new business registered in FY17 as basically now no operational. And which means, and in fact, when I look at the other last 10 years, sometimes it goes to 45% or 50%. Basically, they go out of the business, they're inoperational something. What are the major challenges you see that these entrepreneurs face and they're not able to sustain their business?
There could be...
Yeah.
Hello? When you're starting a business, you are making certain presumptions. And if any of that presumption goes wrong, there's a chance that you will not survive. So the problem is that it could be because of several reasons, whether you have got your technology right, if you're using technology, have you got your business plan right? And when anybody starts a business, from day one, I have seen people talk about profits, but they don't realize that there could be the other side, which is the losses. So many times when a new enterprise starts, they don't have even enough cushion or capital if the things don't turn out to be the way they are expected to be. And I would say if your statistic is saying 20%, so it's not a bad number, because when the competition is so huge and finding a niche, if you are competing against an existing player, then what is your USP which you are bringing to the market or to your segment? And the other thing is, if you have invented something which does not already exist, then I think you can capitalize on that and survive and make money. But such inventions or such of they keep on happening, but they are not as common. So when we talk about the enterprise and the statistics which you are talking about, it could be a mix of everything. It could be a small business. It could be a small manufacturing unit. So it works both ways. People say small is beautiful, but in business, sometimes if you are a small fish and there are larger fish in the pond, then your chances of not being eaten by the larger fish, they are very minimal. So business is all about, one is about your ability to see the future, your ability to produce, in that sense, either service or manufacturing product, which has some advantage or an edge. Third is all about planning, costing, but for any entrepreneur, if they are starting business, purely from the capital perspective and access to the capital perspective, if you have budgeted for say 100 rupees, keep 130 rupees ready. And only then you can take care of any adverse circumstances or the business not turning out to be what you had anticipated.
Thank you for this one. I think since morning we spoke on various issues including the supply chain disruption, and in the COVID we all have learned, and the discussion started in India that how we can bring in our supplier close to home, and the nearshoring thing started coming up, and that's given a challenge as well as opportunity for many companies, many countries, and many countries have taken initiatives to capitalize on that. And I think with that context, I'm coming to you, Rajiv sir, as a policy maker, that there are disruptions and in the supply chain during the pandemic. What do you think that Indian MSMEs, companies can leverage, can do differently to exploit this opportunity and be a part of the global value chain?
Yeah, thank you very much, Arun, and good afternoon, everybody. Good to be here. And I think let me take a slightly different stance, which is that, it's very easy to ask what the SMEs can do for themselves. But I find after my, 5 years now and another 5 years earlier in the government, etc., I think what the SMEs need are two things quite diametrically opposite to each other. One is to be left to themselves and not to be burdened by the regulatory and compliance burden that we have. And I say this because in NITI Aayog we started this process, we brought it to the attention of the Prime Minister. He instructed everybody, all the governments, included that in his 15th August address, I think last year. 60,000, 64,000 regulatory and compliance burden that the SMEs face. And they don't have the wherewithal to deal with them, because larger companies have departments, GR and government relations and this and that, whatever you call them, and they manage that somehow or the other. SMEs face this burden very often, very early on, and they buckle under, and that's one thing. And we did this follow-up with several state governments, and, people did it. The state government did not even know how many times the inspectors visited their units. And for example, just one example that I give you, that every restaurant which has a bar license, I think in the state of Delhi, has to officially liquidate the entire holdings at the end of every 31st March. Now imagine somebody doing that, and that's the requirement now. So, anyway, so that's first part. But on the other side, as I said, so one is let them be. And the second part, of course, is that I think in every country, small and medium enterprises need hand-holding. They need information. They don't have the wherewithal, again, to compare themselves, with global players. They don't have the wherewithal to see as to how they can become a part of the regional or, global production networks. They don't know how to access technology, etc. And in this context, I had suggested long ago to look at both the German and the Japanese model. The German model is amazing, is the banks actually, and this is to my colleague here, Mr. Rajiv Kumar. The banks actually take an active interest. They're not just lenders, they're very often also equity holders. And they work with the companies to give them, and then that's the banks. But the other part is, which is the venture capital, the angel investors, all of those. I met so many. Yesterday I was with an amazing, I don't know if you know them, he's somebody called Anil Gupta, who's himself professor at IIM, who does his Shodh Yatras and Honeybee Network and all of that. And he's collected about 100 innovators from the ground level up. And some amazing work, but each one of them faced the problem of scaling up. He's got an innovation, and he's earning revenues, but he doesn't find, because there is no culture of this sort of thing. And I find it very interesting now, and this is where I think Dun & Bradstreet can work with them. A new thing is coming up in India, which is private accelerators. Not incubators, but accelerators. And I think that's the one to go for, because they can bring together a whole multiple, set of services which will make the services, as MSMEs grows. So I think this is what, the MSMEs, the guys who come there either with very small, micro or whatever, they come there with some aspirations and dreams, and very often not enough knowledge, not enough capital either. But I think it's ours. Can the system respond to that dreams and to make them to happen? This happens in the Silicon Valley. I think we can make it happen here. Bangalore is beginning to happen, and that's where I think we need to go.
Thank you for your perspective. I think moving to what we call a more of a long-term concept, I think we spoke about sustainability piece and since morning, and I think there's a lot more we can not just bring those companies, nurture them, support them, and sustain them for a long. I think that's concept we're talking about quite some time in the ESG piece. And with that, coming to you, Neeraj, there's a growing importance of ESG, changing corporate strategy as well as performance and the reporting metrics. Do you see any difference in the approach of SMEs to ESG in India, globally, and why it is critical for SME to work further, putting ESG piece into their growth strategy to ensure that the sustainability piece is taken care of?
Yeah, so ESG, is an interesting subject, and different people feel differently about it. And just going back to what you were saying earlier, that from an SME perspective can be another burden that they have to fulfill now to meet the requirements. Now, having said that, sometimes you can wish things away and sometimes you can't, right? That ESG is a fact of life, and ESG compliance does lead to good outcomes. Our own research at DNB shows that companies that were compliant with ESG, they over the 5-year period had like a 30% revenue growth rate versus a 14% for those who were lower on the ESG scale. The default rates on those companies that were more ESG compliant was 1.6 times lower than that that were not compliant with them. Now, that correlation doesn't mean causation. It means a well-managed company may be good by itself on an ESG perspective, not the other way around. But I think what's critical is, because it's a bit of the wild, wild west, is for regulators, and especially I think India can take, to be very clear on what ESG compliance means, so that a small and medium enterprise clearly knows what it needs to do and what it doesn't need to do. And why that's important is because it's such a critical subject in many of the manufacturers, and many of the large companies around the world will only deal with suppliers that will have that ESG compliance seal to them. So it's almost becoming a necessary condition to play the game. And I think this is another place where DNB will play a substantial role in trying to make it easy for SMEs to get to that, to understand what needs to be done, to get the certifications around them so that they can enter the global supply chain with the minimum amount of bureaucratic burden and overhead that these people cannot afford.
Thank you. I think we do agree. I think there are increased activity between Europe and India, as compared to the pre-pandemic, which means the companies from the Europe are looking more of ESG compliant companies when they basically get into the trade, which means ignoring ESG at this point of time is losing out those business opportunities. Now, I think coming back to you, Rajiv sir, I think you talked about that piece, and since morning we had multiple discussion, and this access to finance was coming out loud and clear, and then issues and challenges. You think those things can be resolved, and the issues and challenges will help when companies adopt some digital technology and have an innovative way of financing, let's say including supply chain financing? Will that issues and challenges the companies facing will ease, or it will just be one-off solution?
Over a period of time, the environment has changed a lot. Even for access, when we talk about the access to finance for the MSMEs, there are very visible trends that the technology has become a great enabler for both the borrowers and the lenders. And I joined the bank in 1980, and that was all manual systems, and we always faced you talk about twin balance sheet problem. We had the problem of triple balance sheet. One for the enterprise, one for the tax purposes, and one for the bankers. But today, there is so much data and information is available that the lending based on the data analytics, it has eased the access to finance. And today, say for example, like I am associated with Bharat Pay, which is in the payment system, but because we have access to their cash flow as well as the data about the transaction, so the enablement for the micro and small enterprises, I'm not talking about even the medium enterprises, because of the access to the data and the cash flow, today there is an enablement where we can enable lending. We can't lend, we are not lenders, but we can enable lending or access to finance to those people who would otherwise not be able to get money from the formal system. So this trend where the movement from informal to formal, that is real, that is happening. Major development which is happening is on the account aggregator side, where the asymmetry in the availability of information or the ease with which a lender can have information. When the ecosystem fully develops account aggregator, where India has taken lead, I think that will also be a game changer when it comes to the access to finance. And the problem is not about the debt capital, and Mr. Rajiv Kumar also, when he was making that comment, we always talk about the debt capital, but the problem is with the equity capital, the risk capital. The banks, the legacy banks, the institutions, or NBFCs who provide debt, they are not providers of that risk capital. They are there to provide debt at a reasonable price. But you need multiple type of players who have the risk appetite and can provide the risk capital. Because in the absence of risk capital, how do you provide the debt capital? But the discussion always is about non-availability of loan from the banks and the banking system. But what we need to talk about more and more is about the availability of the risk capital. Obviously, if a risk capital is for a higher risky or enterprise, the reward expectation would be higher. But if you expect the bank to lend at 8 or 9% and the default risk is high, then how do you lend the money? And there is not enough risk capital in the country even now, although we have lot of investment which has come into the new age companies, but they are also in the last 8 to 10 months, the environment has completely changed. So this balance between the risk and debt capital is very much required, but the way the risk underwriting in the country is happening, there's a huge change, and I can say that companies like Dun & Bradstreet or all the credit bureaus, they all are playing a very critical role in providing the data which is required.
So thank you, Mr. Rajneesh. We are running, against time, and I think I need to wrap this up. I have a last couple of questions, and the one question, Rajiv sir, I think we spoke in the morning and talking about one concept, missing middle. When I look at overall companies in India, 95% of company belongs to the micro categories, 4% categories belong to small and medium, and less than 1% belong to the large company. That 4.5, what we are basically talking about, unfortunately in other developed countries, there are 40% and 50%. India, that's the mechanism from what we call graduating from small to micro to small to medium and large is not working. What, according to you, think government or other policymakers should do to ensure that things are taken care of and we have a more of a small and medium enterprise who will take on the growth story to the new trajectory?
I think the point made by Rajneesh is an important one, which is that you don't have people who share risks, and I think assessing risk, managing risk, and then sharing it, I think is the key here, because every time you cross a threshold, your risk perception and your risk appetite changes. That's the first part of it. The second part of it, I think I already mentioned, which is that, and this has been an old story, we give birth to midgets and dwarfs. That's the story that India has. And I think here again, earlier story has changed a lot now. And in the last 3 years, because the definition of SMEs has changed, and the capital base has gone up to 250 crore and 50 crore and so on. So that's a very big movement there. And then there are some states like Rajasthan, which have said that, for the first 3 years, there'll be no visits by the inspectors at all, and so therefore you can grow. So I think, you're back to the same story, which is that there is no system, there is no mechanism to help nurture entrepreneurship in this country. We keep talking about it. And by the way, I am very clear in my mind that entrepreneurship is the key strength for the Indian economy and for India. And if India has to grow, it'll have to grow on the basis of private entrepreneurship. And therefore, what you need to do is to look out for, and this is what we did in Atal Innovation Mission, in NITI Aayog, that we set up about 70 incubators, that anybody with a good idea can come, and then we gave them the assistance and then connected them, to the larger players and try to get the, first series, second series, etc., of investment. Now, again, I think the missing middle is, I wouldn't want to repeat myself, one is because of the regulatory burden, that nobody wanted to grow big. Because as soon as you grew big, the story always was, let's keep under the radar. Why is that? And I think that's the problem. Now, keeping under the radar also means that if you are above the radar, you are looked at somehow with suspicion. And I think this is where, and I'll stop here because that's one of my key lessons that I've learned out of NITI, is that until we create an environment of trust between different stakeholders at all levels, we will never be able to achieve our potential. And the trust, how to create that trust is a multifaceted thing. But one of the things where Dun and Bradstreet can help is that trust very often relies upon more and more information. Because the more information that you have about anything, about any entity, the better off you are. So whether it's credit bureaus or your rankings or S&P, etc. But there again, and finally, is that the credibility of these rankings and this information, and is key to the trust building, because once that falters, then everything falls to the ground again. So I think, let me leave it at that, because what I find is that this lack of trust between the government, the business, the private enterprise, the academia, the civil society, all of us are not there, as a result of that, not being able to pull together, to try and achieve the growth and get this thing about small to medium to, The government has tried by changing the definition, but I think a lot more needs to be done, and which we can contribute to by bringing this discussion into the public domain.
So thank you. I know you talked about that, how DNB can help and how DNB can come into the pictures. One final comment from you, Neeraj, that globally or in India, how DNB is helping MSME community in their growth journey and how we can take it ahead.
Yeah, so look, I want to reinforce the 2 points that were made. One is that you do need a more sophisticated mechanism for risk capital. Like if you go to the US, you'll have people who provide seed capital, angel investors, early stage investors. There's a whole plethora of private investors who participate in that risk taking. And the second point is the trust factor, right, which is built around data. And one other point I would like to make is that capital is available around the world. So if you're if you're looking for that kind of private capital, you don't just have to look at yourself from the Indian market. So how do you access, if you're David and not Goliath, how do you become and play like Goliath? And I think DNB's job is to make sure that small and medium enterprises and middle enterprises can play in that boxing match with the heavyweights who have the scale to compete with them. And what do? We provide, and I want to be brief, we give you the opportunity through our DUNS registered seal and many others to get credibility and visibility in the global supply chain, right? So you have the scores, you are then a proven player that someone should do business with. Secondly, through our digital tools and analysis, we provide to help to reduce the distribution cost, i.e. how do you find new clients quickly? How do you find clients who really have the intent to buy from you? So all the use of data and all the use of the tools on AI and other things that we do are meant to help these companies reduce the cost of distribution and find prospects. Thirdly, through our scores and default other things to make sure that you all deal with good counterparties, that you are not stuck with dealing with counterparties who won't pay their bills. So our scores, our surveillance mechanisms help that. And also in that context, I think the ESG seal over time will help you also get that in a much easier, lighter, and cheaper way so that all of these enterprises can play the game. And finally, I think in many countries, including India, we publish several indices, and those indices give how the SME sector is performing, and that companies can themselves use on where they rank versus that index to know what part of their management processes that they need to change to go up. But essentially, all these scores so far have been used from a supply point of view and from a point of view of finding customers. I do believe, reflecting on what has been said, some of these can be used to access capital overseas because that's providing you the transparency for investors to invest in the fastest growing, one of the fastest growing markets in the world. So I would encourage anybody and everybody who's in the audience as well as ourselves to make sure we make those tools available.
Thank you, Neeraj. Thank you for your insight. Thank you, Rajiv sir, for your insight. Thank you, Rajiv sir, for your insight. I think, just to conclude, there is no issue with the entrepreneurship spirit we have in India. I think that's growing. No denying that there are issues. But what is required, that all the stakeholders, you, MSME, the bankers, the policymaker, government, service provider like us, come together and form the part of what we call the collaboration and trust and take this growth journey forward using data analytics. With that, I'll close panel discussion. Thank you, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for that lovely session, gentlemen. I'm going to request you to stay here for a few more minutes. I would now like to request Mr. Avinash Gupta, Managing Director and CEO, India Dun & Bradstreet, to come on the stage and give away the mementos. Can we have a huge round of applause? Ladies and gentlemen, come on, we can do better. Can we have a huge round of applause? Such a powerful session. I would request everybody to step back for a group photo. Sir, can we please have a group photo? Thank you once again, gentlemen, for for such a powerful session. Indeed, I think all of us are enlightened with all the insights that you have shared today. Once again, a huge round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Come on, we can do better than this. Thank you so much. With that, we come to our final round of panel discussion. This time on the changing landscape of risk management.